Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, December 16th, 2022. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The Senate passes the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. That is the military spending bill for the next year. And it is $858 billion. It's a huge spending bill. It passed in a vote of 83 to 11, and it's already been approved by the House. So this now sends it to President Biden's desk for his signature. And he is likely going to sign it, I would guess, on Friday, sometime on Friday. So this $858 billion bill, I went over this when the House passed it, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is important to point out that it's $45 billion more than what Biden asked for, than what the White House requested of Congress. $45 billion more. That's a huge increase. And it represents an 8% increase from the 2022 NDAA. It marks the second year in a row that Congress added tens of billions of dollars to the president's original request. This is becoming a pattern now. I looked the NDAA from 2022, it was 782 billion, and that was 25 billion more than what Biden asked for. So huge jumps here. And this is part of the effort. Congress is saying, oh, it has to match inflation. I mean, inflation did reach, over 8%. But it's just such a huge price tag. We're closing in just a few more years, we're going to have an over $1 trillion NDAA. Now, it's always important to point out that the true military spending numbers are well over a trillion when you factor in intelligence agencies and things like that. And I mean, consider all the money that we've spent on Ukraine at this point. That's not included in the NDAA. Those are emergency funds that are separate. So we're easily over a trillion, but still, once the NDAA actually reaches that, that will be pretty significant. So out of the 858 billion, 817 billion will go to the Pentagon, and the remaining funds will go toward military spending for other departments, including $30 billion for the Energy Department's nuclear weapons program. The NDAA, this is going to ramp up tensions with Russia and China as it includes amendments that will help the U.S. send more arms to Ukraine and Taiwan. So uh, one of the biggest things in this bill is an amendment that would give the Pentagon wartime purchasing powers by allowing non-competitive multi-year contracts for certain weapons, and it's a lot of the weapons and arms that they've been sending into Ukraine. It's mostly Raytheon and Lockheed Martin made equipment, so they're really going to make out on this. So they could sign multi-year deals for ammunition or smaller missile systems. That means it'll give them the incentive to really ramp up production and really make a lot of money. And this authority could be used to refill U.S. stockpiles, arm Ukraine, and assist foreign governments that have provided support for Ukraine. Also, Taiwan military aid, which I'll get more into in the next one. I know I do cover that a lot, but I think it's very important and kind of going unnoticed by a lot of people, this big step that the U.S. is taking. So this bill, again, most of the Ukraine funding is going to be authorized as emergency funds, and the White House wants $37.7 billion in additional Ukraine funding. Chuck Schumer said the other day that's probably going to be in an omnibus spending bill that they're probably going to pass next week. Okay, so the next one, Congress is at odds over how to give Taiwan military aid, and this is the military aid that's included in the NDAA. One portion of it, which is $10 billion over the next 5 years that are set to be dispersed through the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S. weapons. According to Defense News, top congressional appropriators want they want to provide this $10 billion to Taiwan through loans that need to be paid back rather than giving money through grants, which is money that they'll just give Taiwan and they won't, get paid back for it which is how they usually give this aid. And the idea of making it a loan instead is to ease the pressure on the State Department's budget. Because the State Department's budget in 2022, it was about 56 billion. 6 billion of that was foreign military financing. So adding an extra 2 billion a year to that is, a significant number. So I guess that's the concern here. But either way, they're going to give this aid to Taiwan because there was some question about how they're going to fund this. So members of Congress, while there's appropriators that are that want the loans, members of Congress on the foreign relations committees, they want to send it through grants. They just want to give Taiwan the money. And of course, this is the form. This is how Taiwan is hoping to receive this aid. They don't want to have to pay it back. They quoted Defense News quoted a spokesman for Taiwan's de facto embassy in Washington that said, quote, "We urgently need the help and hope that assistance will be allocated as grants. We will maintain close communication and coordination with Congress and the executive branch to ensure that Taiwan's defense needs are immediately met," end quote. So Senators Bob Menendez and James Reich and Reps Gregory Meeks and Mike McCall, they're on the Foreign Relations Committees of the House, respectively, and the Senate. They favor sending the money in grants, and they sent a letter to congressional leadership, to the House and Senate majority and minority leaders saying, let's just give it to them. But either way, however they give this aid to Taiwan, it will be viewed as a major provocation by China, as such assistance is unprecedented. Since Washington severed diplomatic relations with Taipei in 1979, the U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan but has never financed the purchase. So on top of this foreign military financing, which comes out to $2 billion a year, the NDAA also includes drawdown authority, which $1 billion. That's mostly how the U.S. has been arming Taiwan. So they're just going to be able to send weapons to Taiwan directly from Pentagon stockpiles. That's a way they can get weapons to Taiwan very quickly. Instead of entering contracts and these long processes, they could just send it, right away. So $3 billion in military aid each year. So it's a huge increase. And the NDAA also contains provisions to boost informal diplomatic relations between the U.S. and China, which is another type of cooperation that will anger Beijing. One amendment would send U.S. government employees to Taiwan for a 2-year fellowship program. So that might not sound like it's that significant. It's just government workers. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily high level, but these sorts of slowly moving towards, formal relations, this stuff really, China is it's almost more provocative to China than some of the military stuff. So, it's just another one of these steps, how the U.S. is not doing what they're telling China they're doing. They say that they are not trying to change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, but they clearly are by increasing all this support for Taiwan in all different ways. They're in trade talks, military aid, just all sorts of stuff. All right, the next article here, U.S. to expand training for Ukrainian troops. So this plan, this was reported by CNN a few weeks ago when I covered it, but it looks like it's confirmed that the Pentagon is planning a major expansion of the number of Ukrainian troops that it will train in Germany and aims to start the new program in early 2023. The expanded program will enable the U.S. military to train up to 800 Ukrainian troops each month, which is a battalion-sized force. The U.S. has been training Ukrainian forces in Germany and in other undisclosed locations in Europe since earlier in the war at a rate of about 300 troops per month. So this is according to the Pentagon statistics. So 300 to 800, that's more than double. It's pretty significant. President Biden has already approved the new training program, which will take place at a U.S. Army base in Grafenwohr, Germany. Previous training efforts have been focused on using specific weapon systems such as the HIMARS rocket systems, but the new program will be more advanced and will include battlefield tactics such as coordinating infantry maneuvers with artillery support. The U.S. training program will reflect what Ukrainians have been going through in the UK. The British military started the training program in the summer in Britain, with the goal of training 10,000 Ukrainian troops in infantry tactics. And other European countries have been helping in that effort over there in the UK. And the new U.S. training program reflects the ever increasing U.S. involvement in the war in Ukraine. Mission creep, what we're always talking about. The U.S. is set to open a new command center in Germany that will be entirely dedicated to arming and training Ukrainian forces, signaling that Washington is planning to support a proxy war against Russia for years to come. All right, the next article here, this is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute, and they're doing their fundraiser over there if you want to help them out. Ukraine is furious as the EU will refine sanctions on Russian fertilizer exports. So the European Union agreed to redefine sanctions on some Russian exports to make it easier for poorer nations to import Russian fertilizer. A group of Western European nations believe that the reworded sanctions policy will help to ease the food crisis in many African nations. But of course, Kiev was outraged at the EU for taking any steps that even slightly eased the economic war on Russia. So the tight blockade on Russian agricultural exports caused a rift among EU members. Several Western European states argued, that's like France and Germany that have been less hawkish than the Eastern European and the British. But this is the EU, so the British aren't involved in this. So several Western European states argued that the language of the sanctions was creating hunger in Africa. However, Poland led a bloc of Eastern European nations arguing that they wanted to maintain the full scope of the economic war on Moscow. Politico reports that the two sides reached a compromise by modifying the language of the sanctions to make it clear third countries can import Russian fertilizer. And the decision made Kiev irate. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba expressed his outrage on Twitter. He said, quote, attempts to allow Russian oligarchs and companies to derogate from the already imposed EU sanctions deal a blow to the entire sanctions regime, undermine support for Ukraine and our joint effort to stop Putin's war machine. We strongly oppose them and thank EU members who do so too, end quote. So while EU sanctions do not specifically target Moscow's fertilizer exports, the blacklisting of several Russian businessmen and the legal uncertainty and just sanctions on Russia in general created by this campaign against Russia have made buying Russian agricultural products more difficult. And this phenomenon is typical in countries that are heavily sanctioned by the U.S. and its allies. We always see this happen. So you can't be surprised when the sanctions that the U.S. and its allies put on countries generally have exemptions for food and medical goods and things like that. But because of the nature of sanctions, they put a country under economic blockade, essentially. This just discourages companies altogether from banks, from processing transactions, shipping companies from shipping things in and out, knowing that their ships are going to be inspected, more so than normal. It just abstains them from doing any business with the targeted nation. So it's good to see, I think, the EU trying to change the language to get this fertilizer moving, over to Africa. And this is actually also part of the grain deal. So the grain export deal that has unlocked Ukraine's Black Sea ports that Turkey and the UN brokered between Russia and Ukraine, that's been a success. Ukrainian grain has been flowing. Part of that deal was that Russia got the UN to agree that they would work with the Western countries to get them to ease their sanctions so it's easier for Russia to export its agricultural goods, fertilizer, and grain. So it could be related to that too. Okay, so the next one here, Netanyahu says that the U.S. must reaffirm its alliance with Saudi Arabia. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the incoming Israeli prime minister who's forming his new government, he said in an interview on Thursday that the U.S. must reaffirm its alliance with Saudi Arabia and that he will seek normalization with Riyadh once in office. So Netanyahu said this in an interview with Al Arabiya, which is an Arab news channel. He said, quote, "I think that the alliance, the traditional U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia and other countries has to be reaffirmed. There should not be periodic swings or even wild swings in this relationship because I think that the alliance between America's allies and with America is the anchor of stability in our region," end quote. So his comments come after the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress have called for a change in the U.S. Saudi relationship after the OPEC plus oil production cuts in October. Like that happened right before midterms. But the Biden administration hasn't actually taken any concrete steps toward that end, and this week worked to sabotage a war powers resolution that would have ended U.S. support for the Saudi led coalition in Yemen. I'm going to get more into that in the next article. Netanyahu said that he intends to discuss the Saudi relationship with President Biden once he becomes prime minister. And Netanyahu also said that he wants to build on the Abraham Accords, which his former government signed in 2020 to establish diplomatic ties with Bahrain and the UAE. Netanyahu said that it's up to the leaders in Saudi Arabia if they want to partake in this effort. Saudi officials recently reaffirmed that they seek a Palestinian state as a precondition for normalizing with Israel. But in order to form a coalition government, Netanyahu gave religious Zionism party leader Bezalel Smotrich, who is an ultra-nationalist settler, he lives in a settlement, he's given him sweeping powers over the West Bank. So this could be an issue with the Abraham Accords because Netanyahu, as part of the deal, said that he wouldn't annex the West Bank. And many people view giving, these extremist settlers these sweeping authorities over the West Bank, it looks like they're going to be able to approve settler construction and as well as the demolition of Palestinian homes. So they can really expand settlements, which in general, the slow expansion of settlements really is kind of de facto annexation, very slow rolled. So this could really speed that up. So this could make the Saudis less likely to sign a normalization, although I don't think they really care that much about the Palestinians, the leadership at least. So Netanyahu insisted in the interview that he's saying that he's going to be making the decisions in the West Bank, and his defense minister as well. Smotrich is going to be in a new minister position within the defense ministry, but Netanyahu's insisting these decisions are still going to be made by him. But who knows? Even if that's true, while he was in office during the Trump administration, especially because Trump was super pro-Israel and made, changed the policy that settlements in the West Bank were considered illegal. Netanyahu really expanded settlements in the West Bank, and he was hoping to annex areas that were designated to Israel under a so-called peace plan that was devised by the Trump administration. He only backed down on the plan before signing the Abraham Accords. But even after that, he continued the settlement expansion. So even if Netanyahu's calling the shots, there's still going to be quite a bit of settlement expansion in the West Bank. All right. So the next one here, this is about the Yemen war powers resolution. And this is actually from the Washington Post. It just has more details about how the Biden administration worked to kill that war powers resolution. So the legislation would have ended U.S. support for the Saudi-led war effort in Yemen, which has gone on for more than 7 years. Forces from a Saudi-led coalition have bombed and killed hundreds of thousands of Yemeni civilians and blocked crucial ports, helping fuel a nationwide famine. So one of the reasons we ran this Washington Post article rather than me writing something up about it is that this is actually pretty good and very critical of the war. So similar resolutions passed in the Senate in 2018 and 2019 during the Trump administration with support of all Democratic senators. In 2019, the measure won the support of both chambers of Congress, but not enough to override a veto by President Trump. And now that those efforts have been renewed, President Biden's White House also opposes them. It says that it's putting the president in an unusual position of standing against an effort to punish the Saudis, but he hasn't actually really done anything to do that. So, Biden aides say that the president is opposing the resolution for different reasons than Trump did. The current version of Sanders' measure differs from the previous versions because it defines hostilities as intelligence sharing and support operation, maintenance for Saudi warplanes. And they're saying that this could have dire consequences for U.S. operations globally, including Ukraine. One senior Democratic aide says that it's made them nervous and that it could have real ramifications for U.S. support for Ukraine and support for Israel as well. And I think this does go to show, I mean, the U.S. is totally fueling the war, the Saudi war in Yemen. They wouldn't be able to fly their planes without U.S. support. So obviously they're involved in hostilities. They're an aggressor in that war. And, if you translate that to Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces are entirely relying on U.S. support. They say so themselves. So, yeah, I mean, it does go to show just how the U.S. is a belligerent in the war in Ukraine against Russia. But that's why they're saying they're concerned about it. But I think they just don't actually want to force the Saudis to end the war. I think this is kind of a BS excuse. And the White House, they distributed talking points to senators ahead of the scheduled vote on Tuesday night. So that was Bernie Sanders said he was going to bring it to the floor, but he folded under the White House pressure. And a lot of people, defending him say, oh, he wouldn't have had the votes anyway because some Democrats were backing down because the White House didn't want them to do it. But The Intercept reported that advocates, activists that were really pushing this believed that they had 5 to 8 Republicans in the Senate that were going to vote in favor of it. So it still could have passed. I mean, he should have just put the vote up anyway, of course, just to see who would vote yes and no matter what was going to happen. But yeah, so this is just interesting that the way that they are framing it. And they quote Eric Sperling from Just Foreign Policy, which is an advocacy organization that's really been involved in getting this out there. And he said that while the White House is touting, they're saying, oh, there hasn't been Saudi airstrikes. They're taking credit for that. Their opposition to Bernie's bill shows that they remain open to supporting a Saudi escalation because while there's been no Saudi airstrikes, it can escalate at any time. And the best way to support Yemen's truce, Sperling said, is to guarantee that Saudi airstrikes won't happen again. And he's absolutely right about that. So, it's just a nonsense excuse. And they also say, oh, ending, our support for the Saudis would get in the way of diplomacy. But also The Intercept, they quoted a former UN official who was the envoy to Yemen, says there's no diplomacy happening right now. So it's just all nonsense. And they're just punishing Yemeni civilians. All right, the next article here, Serbia and Kosovo. Serbia is looking to deploy troops in Kosovo. Tensions are still high over there in the Balkans. And Serbia has formally asked NATO if it can deploy up to 1,000 troops into northern Kosovo. And where the president, Alexander Vucic, he says ethnic Serbs are being terrorized by the Kosovo government. So he made this request to the commander of NATO forces in Kosovo, known as K4. And Serbian officials, they say that based on the UN resolution that formally ended the Kosovo war, they say that allows for the deployment of up to 1,000 Serbian troops into Kosovo. But he doubts that that's going to happen. The Serbs don't actually expect to get this request granted. Vucic is saying he's doing this just to get it on record. But tensions have been high in northern Kosovo since the summer when Kosovo authorities tried to implement a policy that would require ethnic Serbs to acquire a license plate issued by Kosovo. So Serbs in northern Kosovo, they don't recognize the government, and they still use Belgrade-issued documents to cross the border into Serbia. So there's a whole group of people in this northern area that don't even recognize the country that they live in. And also Kosovo is not recognized by a lot of other countries, including Serbia, of course, and Russia, China, and I believe some European countries as well. So tensions have been high. They've been trying to implement these restrictions on the Serbs in the northern area there. Serbia and Kosovo, they failed to reach a deal in talks back in November. And Serbs have barricaded border crossings between Serbia and Kosovo to protest the deployment of ethnic Albanian police in the area. And Serbia wants to deploy troops to secure the border crossings. And they're saying that NATO forces cannot protect the Kosovo Serbs from the ethnic Albanians. And so Kosovo has NATO on their side, so they're kind of emboldened by NATO. And K4 has previously, that's the NATO coalition there, they've previously threatened to intervene if stability is jeopardized in northern Kosovo when tensions were high over the summer. So if Serbia does go ahead with the troop deployment, even if they don't get the okay from NATO, which they're not going to get, NATO's likely going to take action. So this is an area that could always kind of pop off. And some people believe that NATO is kind of stoking this to distract Russia. Russia is back Serbia, although Serbia also wants to become part of the EU. But K4 has presented, K4, the NATO coalition, has been present in Kosovo since the 1999, the US and NATO bombing campaign against Serbia when they carved Kosovo out of Serbia. And Kosovo formally declared its independence in 2008, but it's not recognized by enough countries to have a seat at the UN. Currently, there are about 3,700 NATO troops deployed under the K4 mission, including over 600 US troops. So they've been there since 99. It's one of those kind of endless wars that the US is involved in. All right, the next article here, the IAEA delegation, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, they're going to visit Iran over this uranium traces inquiry that this has been open for years. So the IAEA say that they found traces of uranium in undeclared Iranian nuclear sites. And they have not been happy with Iran's explanations for it. And this has really gotten in the way of the diplomacy between the US and Iran on reviving the Iran nuclear deal, which unfortunately is totally dead now. I mean, there's no sign that nuclear deal talks are going to resume and that the US is going to lift sanctions on Iran. That's just not going to happen. But anyway, so the IAEA, they are going over to Iran to try to settle this issue. The Iranian officials, they say, that they've explained themselves enough, and they say that the traces were planted by Israel, and Israel does have a history of covert operations targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. So it's not totally out of the question that Israel planted these traces. Who knows? But the planned IAEA visit, it comes as there is virtually no hope that the U.S. and Iran will be resuming negotiations anytime soon. For months now, since the talks have stalled, the U.S. has ramped up sanctions on Iran, expressed support for protesters inside the country, and threatened military action. Even though they have concluded that Iran's not trying to make a nuclear bomb, they're still threatening to use military option as a last resort to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. This is really just a little update on the state of things between the U.S. and Iran. And but I guess it's good to see that they're trying to work things. The IAEA is going over there, try to work that out. All right, that's it for the news. You could go check out our viewpoints. We have a lot of good ones, as always, including one from Connor Freeman over at the Libertarian Institute. Washington erases red lines, escalates proxy war with Russia. So this is just about all these escalations that we've been seeing, the attacks deep inside Russia, the U.S. tacitly backing it. And then we have one from William J. Astor, going nuclear again. This is about, the B-21 bomber and all these steps the U.S. has taken to ramp up, modernize its nuclear forces. We've run from Thomas Knapp, who does our comment moderation for us at antiwar.com. That's a big help. And he also edits, some of my typos. But it's about the Yemen, war powers resolution, being critical of Sanders and the other Democrats that caved to the pressure. We also have one from C.B. Ford. It's a book review about how the West brought war to Ukraine, which is Benjamin Oblow's book that sponsored the show for about a month. And it's a great book that you guys should go read. And also the audiobook is out for that, because I know a lot of people, that's how they read books now, is they listen to them, including myself. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So that's available at Amazon. And I know some people don't want to buy stuff from Amazon. So if you Google how the West brought war to Ukraine, you'll find other ways to purchase it. And then our spotlight is from our columnist Ted Snyder, but it's over at the American Conservative about America's roving goals for Ukraine. That they keep shifting the goalposts. But that is all. Man, I went over a lot of stuff. I hope that wasn't too much information too fast. But that's the last show for the week. Thanks for listening and supporting the show and all the feedback I've been getting. It feels like this thing's growing, and I think I'm getting a lot of information out to a lot of people. You could always support the show at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe on YouTube. You can leave reviews on Apple podcasts and other places. So that's another way to help us. But anyway, thanks for listening. I will talk to you after the weekend with some more news.